So welcome everyone to the JB Media Digital Drop-In. This is Sarah Benoit, your lead instructor and co-founder. And I'm so excited to have everybody here as usual for our first digital drop-in of September. Few housekeeping items before I introduce our special guest today. First, I want to remind everybody that you will get a recording of this after the fact. So if there's things that you want to go back over or questions that you have, a week from now or down the road, you can feel free to re-listen. And of course, when you get that email, you'll also get my contact information. So you can always reach out to me with any questions or further conversation points that you have around the topic. Also today, you have at your fingertips as part of Zoom, both the chat and the Q&A feature. So ideally, everyone would place their questions for myself or Barry into the Q&A because that's a little easier for us to follow as we go along. But you can also throw things in the chat and I will also monitor that as well. So please feel free to have conversations in the chat with us, with each other, and to throw any questions you'd like us to field during today's call into the Q&A, and we will address those. And feel free to do that anytime today. We'll go along in this hour and I'll be monitoring all that. So you don't need to wait till the end. Like I said, I'm really excited today to introduce our special guest, Barry Barton. Barry and I have actually been circling around each other, I feel, in the community for literally years here in Asheville. And I've always deeply enjoyed a lot of the things that I've seen Barry present on and share. I feel in a lot of ways, even though we haven't spent much one-on-one time, that you and I are really aligned in a lot of sort of core values around the relationships that we want to build with people and the kind of presence that we want to have on stage and how we really help other people get comfortable in their skin. Yeah. I feel like that's something that you and I really believe in. And for those of you who don't know Barry, she's a speaking coach and facilitator, and she runs Stand and Deliver Asheville. She's also heading up TEDx Asheville this year, which is super exciting. I'm a big TEDx fan, and I'm excited to see someone, like I said, with a commitment to helping people really get comfortable in themselves and share important messages to kind of take TEDx Asheville to the next level, which is really exciting. But thank you so much for joining us today, Barry. I'm really excited that you could be here.
Oh, thank you so much. And you are absolutely right. We have circled up. We've had many conversations in many different places. Like I remember one time at Whole Foods on Merriman Avenue, it was just a moment. And there was just like that. Yeah, we're very much aligned in so many areas. So it is wonderful to connect here with you today and with everyone else as well.
So I wanted to just start the conversation, because when I was putting this together, as I mentioned earlier, when we were getting everybody logged on, I usually present slides and I have sort of a more formal, sort of what I call the teachery approach to things.
Right.
But today I really wanted to have a conversation. And I think a lot of that is because for me as a professional, public speaking and standing up in front of people, I did not know when I started my career that that would become such an integral part of what I did. If you had asked me 18 years ago when I started, if the primary part of my job down the road would be education and speaking in front of audiences, I think I probably would have laughed. I would have been like, there's no way I'm doing that, So for those of you who are averse to public speaking, I didn't start out feeling very comfortable. I'm very extroverted. So that might be the one thing I had going for me in the beginning, right? Is that I am an extroverted person. I love connecting with people. I love listening to them. I love sharing my ideas. But outside of that, it was very nerve-wracking. I went into an industry where I was self-taught, where I had no formal education. And it was a matter of really believing that I had a purpose behind standing up in front of everyone and taking a stage, or even just standing up in a smaller room and taking up the space as the speaker, right? That was something I really had to learn. And I think the reason I felt this topic was so valuable to people is because, one, using speaking in your marketing strategy, even if public speaking is not, the ultimate goal of your entire professional vision, even if it's just a part, it is truly a way to let people get to know you. I feel like my speaking definitely boosted a lot of the other parts of my business, because when people saw me stand up in front of a room, they could relate. I became a real person, not just a company, not just a product or service, but I became Sarah. And that made a big difference. That to me allowed me to really then go from sort of just that core relationship piece, which is very important to me, into thinking about how I could use those opportunities to really actually build the relationship. So the other thing I think becomes very important when you're putting together speeches and talks is to really think about the before, during, and after, right? We get so focused on the during, which is the part where I'm standing up in front of everybody and they're looking at me, or I'm on the screen and everybody's listening to me. But we forget sort of that before part where you sort of set up the plan. How are you going to give people calls to action? How are you going to get them to reach out to you afterwards? I learned over the years that just saying, hey, check out my website, that wasn't enough. Because they may or may not do that, especially when I was in the conference scene. They probably weren't going to do that, honestly. They were going to go on to the next talk. And so I started doing just more innovative things when I was, especially in person with people, saying, hey, I'm going to be at this other thing happening at this event later, and I want friends to join me. Who's going to join me? Or I put together a great ebook a number of times so that I could give something away for free after the fact, so that I have a reason to get people's emails and to follow up with them after. So I'm a big fan of kind of making sure with all events in general, but especially when you're doing speaking engagements, think about that before, during, and after. Have time before to strategize, also have time before to feel good, to get in your body and feel good before you walk out on that stage. But then also afterwards, have a plan for following up, because sometimes when you're top of mind with people right after they've seen you speak, that is a great time to leverage the connection before they've moved on to something new. And I think the last piece for marketing that made speaking so valuable is that I really wanted to get comfortable, like I said, because I was self-taught and I'm an entrepreneur and I'm sort of coming at things from like a non-traditional perspective, I would say. I needed to get really comfortable with myself on what role I play as a thought leader or an influencer or whatever it is that I'm building over the long term while I'm getting up in front of more and more people. I think if you don't really understand the impact you want to make, or you're not really clear on how you want me to make people feel, then you don't really achieve the goal because the audience isn't going to get it either if you're not really rooted in it. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we start, that I think those are three things from a marketing perspective and just as a professional, that if you want to use speaking to your advantage, it's like really have some planning involved in it. I'm still an improv artist, so I'm really bad at memorizing. So I'm still going to get up on stage and sometimes make it up. That's just my nature, because if I have to memorize, I'll just freak out and I'll run away. so you can still be in the moment and have that flexibility while you're also planning and being intentional, right, about what you're doing. And like I said, I think it's really key to just really center yourself around what is the impact you want to make, how do you want people to feel, and what is it that you want people to leave with. They might not remember everything you say, but they remember one or two pieces of your story that they really related to. And so if you're really thinking about that ahead of time, then I feel like you end up achieving those things and they're more beneficial. So I just wanted to share that experience before we launch into questions today, because I think they're so key. And I spent a lot of years, honestly, walking onto stages and messing it up and not capitalizing on things and not having follow-up afterwards. And so it's okay if you're not there yet. It's just a matter of over time. If you want the speaking engagements, I think, to turn into real opportunity, a lot of it comes down to that intention that you've put into that space.
Yeah.
So jumping off into questions for you, Barry, my first question was, so how did you get into being a speaking coach? And, that's a pretty specific niche in the coaching world. What really sparked your passion around that and made you want to really help other people become good at this?
Well, my first language actually was movement. I was a dancer. I was a professional dancer for many years. I have a BA in dance. And then I taught dance in public high school for 23 years. And I was a choreographer. And at some point in my career, I began to connect movement with story. And then I started to work with non-dancers. I used to work with folks from 25 years old to 70, creating authentic theater. Again, there was choreography there, but it began to be more authentic stories. So combining these two art forms, the embodied and the language, I was presented this opportunity. It just sort of, a friend of mine just said, hey, would you come to my architect company and do a pilot program? So it was one of those auspicious invitations. I went, I did a 5-week training with them. The lead architect at the end of the last session, he said, we knew we needed this, but we had no idea how good this was going to be. Would you come back? And then I realized that my skills, that my embodiment skills, my speaking skills, my story development skills, and I've come to learn more and more how that art form actually fits into crafting a speech. It began, and that's how it began. So, and I've been a teacher all my life. That is really my love, is recognizing the skill in someone, seeing that skill. I can sometimes, I can see it before they can see it, and helping them discover it and improve it, and then really thrive in the work that they do. So that's what I've been up to. And I also teach at UNCA. So I teach public speaking at UNCA. So high school, college, and adult. I love it all.
So exciting, because that's how I started out as well. In 2006, I was a client of Asheville Score because I had started a company 3 years before, and I was just getting some counseling about how to, I always call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I had no plans to own a company. So when I started, I had no idea what I was doing. But that's exactly what happened. They just gave me this beautiful invitation. They said, our marketing person is no longer teaching seminars. You are so articulate. Would you mind just coming and sharing with people how you have, done your own marketing for your company? And, it's your business. So what have you learned about it? And so I said, yes, of course, with my heart, just wanting to help other people who are starting out. And as soon as I got there, the end of that first talk, they were like, could you do this all the time? So I jumped in because it was so fun. And I think that's something you and I share. The fun part really came from watching people light up and realizing they could do something, realizing that I saw skill in them and talent in them. And as soon as they, I sort of gave that to them, they immediately took it and said, oh, you see it in me. Well, now I can see it in me, and so that's always such a big driver for me.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I had a client, actually an architect, had a terrible experience in a public speaking class in college, and came to my class at the architect firm, and she was just absolutely phenomenal. And I could see this really, truly, it was almost like the blood began to surge back into her body, and I could see her. And then she really did take off with it. And there you go. That's my ticket.
Yeah. And that sort of leads me to my second question. You and I both really believe in empowering people to stand up and tell their story. That's like a core thing for both of us. So do you really believe anyone can be a good public speaker? Like, is that a real thing for people to believe in? Because sometimes when I encourage people to tell their story, they say, well, I'm not going to be comfortable. I'm not going to be good at it. I personally believe that all of us can learn to get comfortable. Maybe that's my improv background, but I'm curious to know what you think about that. Do you think everyone can achieve their goals when it comes to crafting a good speech?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I wouldn't encourage someone that has that kind of fear around it or lack of confidence and say, hey, go find 100 people to speak in front of. Give a toast at a dinner party that you host. Read a piece of poetry when you have your women's group. start in incremental ways. And the more, just like anything, the more that you do it, the stronger you get. I think there's a place where we can stretch, and it's a little uncomfortable, it's a little exciting, but then you get through it, and you're successful. And that was always the way I wanted to teach my students. Was I'd give them a challenge, but I wanted to make sure at the end of the day that they were successful. They could be successful. And then that built for the next day and the next day and the next day. So I think it's about seeking out those experiences where you can feel successful when you walk out of the room. And of course, there's going to be those places where you walk out of the room and you have a V8 moment where you just go, oh my God, what did I just do? And then you deal with that, and you move on.
And I think for those of you that are a little resistant to public speaking or just speaking in front of even a small group, start by doing it with people you trust. Even though my first public speaking was with Asheville SCORE, which is a professional organization, the truth is it's a volunteer. So I wasn't getting paid. So we could take a little bit of the pressure off there right in the beginning of practicing. Like, I'm not necessarily letting people down financially if I'm not that great in the beginning, but also I had such a great relationship with the other volunteers and counselors there. And they'd actually been supporting me as I figured out how to become a business owner in my 20s. And, it was having that space of knowing they had my back. So as I started teaching for them in 2006, 2007, 2008, it really allowed me to say, even if I'm not great tonight, even if I mess it up or I go over or something's not right, we're just going to talk it through how I can be better next time, and they're going to be still glad I'm on the team, and they're going to be still glad that I'm participating. So it was that trust too that allowed me to break through some of my own resistance. So I definitely suggest people find, whether it's personal or it's professional, when you start out, get with people that, believe in you. They know that you're talented. They know you're smart. That's not in question, right? They're going to help you push through some of those resistance pieces.
Yeah.
So I think when it comes to public speaking, at least for me, when I'm talking to people, we talk a lot about, the difference between people who are more outgoing or extroverted versus people who are maybe more introverted or more shy. I will say, extroversion doesn't always mean you're not shy. FYI, I think that's kind of confusing for people sometimes. They think, extroverted people are always comfortable socially, which we are absolutely not. We just get energy from other people, right? That's really what extroversion is. So I'm curious to know, what are your top tips for people that kind of fall into those two camps? The people that feel like they're more introverted or shyer or have trouble kind of going out of their shell versus the people that usually come out of their shell pretty quick, because I feel like there's strengths and weaknesses on both sides.
Yeah. It's very interesting because I've just been spending almost a week with my family, and that dynamic is playing out in my family, where I have a sister that's very extroverted and a niece that's very extroverted, and they will command the space and command the room, and we're listening to them. That's the strength, is that they have that command of the space, and that person potentially also can engage you right away. And I also find that the introverts have a tendency, and I'll speak for myself. So I just, my mother passed away last week. And this is actually my first sort of coming back into the world. And it's really actually a perfect place to come into, because it's a way of connecting with my passion. But I spoke at her funeral, and my sharing was very short. It was one story, and it had a very emotional, personal connection tone to it. And so it was condensed, it was short, but right into the heart of the subject. So I think for introverts, I think we know how to distill down to what I call, I love to say this, sort of that, like an essential oil. You take lavender, a whole field of lavender, and that's an extrovert. They're going to tell you about the whole field. An introvert, we have this capacity to cook it down to that really perfect one drop, and everybody goes, oh, yeah, got it. So I think that's in part what our gift is as introverts.
Yeah, and I'll say, as somebody who's more extroverted, I think the number one tip that I've gotten over the years and that I've really, really worked on is actually that, in the sense that my tendency sometimes is to go too long, give too much detail, overwhelm people. In the beginning of my speaking career, a lot of times people would say, I really enjoyed it because your energy is so high and you look like you're having such a great time. So we all had a great time. I also felt like I was drinking from a fire hose of information. And now I'm like a little stressed out
Yes.
about all the things you told me I should be doing. So, I think that distillation is, sometimes more introverted people don't see that as a strength, but it really is.
Right.
The fact that you take information in and you process through it before you put it back out, those of us on the extroverted side have to learn that.
Yeah.
And I think, on the introverted side, sometimes you have to give yourself permission to take up the space.
Yes.
That it's okay for you to command the stage.
Yes.
Even if you don't do that every day in your regular life.
Right.
That it is okay for you to say, I'm here and I'm going to be a rock star in this moment because I know what I'm saying is really valuable. So I just love that, because I think there's like a back and forth, especially with other friends of mine that speak for a living, where we've really been able to help each other go to that next level, by me being taught how to distill things down. And in a lot of ways, by me teaching somebody else that's speaking how they are allowed to let their energy field get bigger and try to encompass everybody into it. It's like both of them are really big strengths. And so when you get on stage, you've got to work with the talent you've got.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked with a TEDx speaker in 2019, actually a couple of them, that handed me their first draft, and it was 5 pages. And it was just an exorbitant. And of course, and this is introvert, extrovert, we all want to share everything that we know because we think it's so, all important. And that was part of my job, was to help them, just let's get it down to that one core message that you want to land with that audience. So painful process. It can be a painful process for speakers to let go of their brilliance sometimes.
Absolutely. And I also want to touch on something, because I really appreciate you sharing with everyone, the story about your mother and her funeral, because I had an experience in 2018 where somebody that I've worked with for many, many years passed away unexpectedly in an accident. And I was booked in Atlanta for a talk 48 hours later. And, to me, in a lot of ways, that is sometimes like, I don't know, it's maybe what you imagine as like a worst case scenario, like you're getting ready to drive somewhere to give a big speech, and then basically one of the most painful things that you could imagine happens. And I just wanted to share with everyone that, like you said about the funeral moment, where you have this chance to sort of really show up authentically, that is really what happened to me. I wasn't willing to sacrifice that opportunity in Atlanta. And I knew that my friend Tyler would never have wanted me to do that, because we were both business owners. And I felt like, in his heart, he would have wanted me to go anyway. And so I did. But when I gave that talk, which was like at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, like literally I'd found out on Sunday night, I was supposed to get in the car on Monday. And so 9 a.m. on Tuesday, I'm in front of this room full of people I've never met, probably about 100 people. And I just said it as it really was. I literally started my talk with the fact that I had just lost a dear friend and he was a big inspiration. And I wanted to bring him into the conversation that morning, because I knew that he would support everything I was about to share with them. And I just have to say that what I was afraid would be maybe the worst talk I'd ever given, to me ended up being probably one of the most powerful moments I have had as a speaker in my life. And I think a lot of it came from realizing that showing up as the real me in that very public moment might actually be more moving than anything else I could have said or done.
Right.
Right. So I made a big impression. I made a lot of connections that day. And it was very serendipitous that I started the day and another speaker ended the day. And we had both experienced deaths in the same week.
Wow.
And so it was funny that at the end of the day, he was like, I want to go back to where Sarah started. And I want to say thank you for encouraging all of us to show up as who we are today and not as some manicured, perfect version of ourselves. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I think a lot of times we don't see those moments as opportunities and we don't see ourselves as strong.
Yeah.
But we are.
Yeah.
You know, that vulnerability makes a big difference in a lot of cases. And that's even more true now than I think it's ever been.
I agree.
You know, so I just want to tell everybody, don't be afraid of that stuff. You know, if you have to cancel, obviously cancel anything you need to in your life. But when you feel like this is an opportunity and I really want to take it anyway, it's like, trust yourself in those moments, you know, that being the real you might actually be the answer to what should have happened.
Yes.
I just think that's a really powerful thing. And I really appreciate you sharing.
Yeah.
So I know you're getting ready to teach a class on this topic, but I'm wondering what's your sort of, you know, getting started point for people when they need to craft a speech for something like TEDx, or maybe they have the chance to speak in an association or an organization about what they do, or maybe they just have the opportunity to stand up in front of their own company and share something of value. Like, where do you suggest they start on, you know, really creating a great speech? Like, what's that number one step they have to take?
So there's two answers to that question. The first is the generating the content, and I offer 3 techniques of generating content, and that's how do I get what's in my head and put it down. And the first is what I call splat it, and that's where you just kind of throw, you know, a client, you know, described it as, you know, we just threw paint on the wall, and I. You know, a lot of folks will maybe make a landing space and they'll just write notes on this big piece of paper, a quote or a title of a book or something that their mother said or whatever. It's just splatting it all out. And, or just, you know, maybe just typing a whole bunch of different ideas on your computer. The second is what I call speak it. And this is what I actually do is I take my phone, my voice memo, and I'll start walking around my home. It's like I have to be moving. And I pretend like I'm in front of an audience speaking. And I just start speaking into my voice memo. And then I transfer from my voice memo onto paper. I really encourage people to put words on a piece of paper. Not for memorization, but so that you can begin to see your own thoughts. And so you can begin to manipulate them around and make sure there's a streamlined thought that's going to make sense to your audience. And then the last is what I call map it, where you in your mind go, okay, I know I'm going to start with a story. Then I'm going to follow that up with a little mini bio of me. And then I'm going to go into these 3 points. So you can actually template your own speeches if you're that clear on your idea. The other part of that question is, I think one of the most important things that we can do as speakers is to have a core message. And the way that I love to do this, especially in person workshops, but I do this with my Craft a Speech Worth sharing Zoom training as well, is I have everybody stand up and pretend like that audience is there. And they say out loud, ladies and gentlemen, if there's one thing and one thing only that you leave with today or tonight after hearing me speak, it is, and then see what bubbles up. And do that a couple of times and just write down what you say. Just keep letting things bubble up, because I find that it's actually through speaking is where my true wisdom starts to emerge. I have to kind of move some of the, excuse the language, but the bullshit out of the way and get really into, oh, this is the one thing I really want you to walk away with today. Because that's all there. If you can leave your audience with that one thing, you've done a terrific job.
Yeah, and I really like how clearly you've defined those sort of exercises, because I didn't even
Mhm.
realize till you were saying it that I actually do all of those depending
Yeah.
on what type of speech I'm giving. Like I tend to
Yeah.
map my classes, and I
Uh-huh.
tend to I started out a writer, at the very beginning of my adulthood. And so, a lot of times I would write things down and kind of have this big focus on crafting how it was written, to then sort of read it and realize it doesn't actually sound like how I would talk. So I would be like, okay, I have to speak it out too. So I can really understand, like, here's the written concepts that I want, that I
Yes.
want to have in
Right.
here. But, I need it to roll off my tongue. I need to feel natural what I'm saying. So a
Yes.
lot of times that combination of kind of writing and speaking is good. I also think from a confidence perspective, when I speak out loud, record myself, and also, sometimes I even enlist people I love. I'm like, listen to me talk about this for a minute, like, so I'm not just alone, once I've gotten the core concepts. But speaking and writing, it integrates it a little bit
Mhm.
differently into your brain. And I feel like that actually boosts my confidence, because if I've both written it and spoken it,
Yep.
somehow it's more ingrained into like my memory. Even though I might not have memorized every word, I've
Yep.
now got like some of the core concepts like already integrated. And that's just going to make me feel like more solid about delivering what I'm about to deliver. So I really like how you broke those down, because they're all so valuable. And I'd never even like really thought about the fact that I'm doing something specific that I
Yeah.
do that stuff.
Yeah. Because it is an oral art. It is language being spoken, not language being read from writing. So yeah, definitely.
And so, you talked about like the mapping, where you're going to tell stories and stuff. And, maybe you're going to make a main point here. You're going to show something at this point. Can you talk a little bit about how storytelling plays into this? I mean, I think we all know storytelling obviously it's a huge part of marketing in general and communications. It's also just a huge part of human experience.
Right.
Our brains actually respond differently when we're exchanging stories, because it's such an actual core piece of human beings and the way that we actually function. So how
Yeah.
do you work that into crafting the speech, and what are some of just like your suggestions around how, because lots of us have many different stories.
Right.
So, how do you figure out what's the best one or the right one, or,
Yeah.
whatever it is?
So, of course, being at a funeral on Monday, and we had a Zoom meeting last night with folks. My mother was born in Brooklyn, actually raised here in Asheville, and so we had family from all over the country, and there were stories. And what was fascinating for me is that it was like looking at my mother through a kaleidoscope. And every time someone offered a story, it was like the kaleidoscope clicked into a new design. It's like, oh my God, I had no idea. We could only know a person through our own perceptions and our own experiences. And so stories have that capacity to open our awareness of what else is possible. Um, so in crafting a speech, and I'll get a little bit more technical here, is that once you know that core message that's going to be threaded from the beginning all the way to the end, what you want to do is you want to support that core message. And what I call this in the Craft a Speech Worth Sharing course is you want to animate that core message. So the analogy I use is that core message is sort of like your vertebra. It's that what holds the whole body upright. And then we want to animate the speech or animate that core message through story. So my right arm might be a story. My left arm might be a statistic. The left leg might be a case study. The right leg might be a metaphor. So what you're doing is you are reaching the more creative thinkers, the ones that take in stories well, take in metaphors well, take in visuals well. And you're also able to connect with your more logical listeners they like the numbers, they like the statistics. And so when you balance a speech with not all of those, you don't want to overwhelm, but you want those things to support that core message. So that's how you have to ask yourself the question, does this story that I want to share, oh, it's a great story, but it has nothing to do with that core message. Find the story that really illustrates, speaks to, opens my mind to that core message. And then you'll know you're right on track.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really like, I really like the structure that you're giving. Like I said, I was a very natural public speaker. I sort of came into it on my own. I love that you're literally in my brain. I'm just like, you're structuring out what I do and defining it for me. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. That's so helpful. Rosemary had a question about, do you speak without your notes or do you use notes if you need them? How do you usually see that playing out?
So I am more of a facilitator and an educator than I am a keynote speaker. So my work has been more speaking and then getting my audience to participate. Being a dance educator, it was learn by do. So my recommendation to clients is, if you're terrified to not have your notes, then have your notes. And I also can help clients take their notes and transfer it into really a map. And so if they know they're starting with a story, they know their story. So they don't have to write that whole story. If they know their 3 points, so we can create a map for you. So for someone, again, that's just, oh my God, I can't go up on that stage without having some notes, carry them. The most important thing is that you're comfortable and that you make that connection to your audience. What I do is because again, I come from a dancer background, one of the most important things that was woven into my being was rehearsal. And I will rehearse a speech, not to memorize word for word, but I will memorize it so that it kind of, what I used to say as a dancer, it would sort of become part of my bones. It just becomes in me and it's there. And if I say different words, if I skip a section, it's just so integrated into me. But that takes planning, that takes deliberate rehearsal time, and that takes doing a little practicing in front of, like Sarah said, some friends, a couple of audiences. Let me test the road here and see how this goes. So that's my long answer to that question.
No, but that's really helpful because I think, everybody's so different. It's funny, like sometimes I find I practice less because the more I practice, the more I freak myself out. So when I was looking for ways to improve my skill, like I said, when I wanted to become a better teacher and a better speaker,
Yeah.
I looked at all these programs and I ended up spending a year studying improv.
Yeah.
And, just because I've realized my talent is being in the moment,
Mhm.
but I have to be able to stay on track. I
Mhm.
can't end up with word salad for, an hour or 15 minutes, regardless of length. I need to have my core message really clear. And so I think it's really important for people to have some type of practice that allows them, like you said, to really pull. I love what you said about it being in your bones, because I think when you pull the messaging and the experience of speaking into your body, again, it's a different level of kind of integration, right?
Yeah.
Where before you get on stage, you've now integrated it into how you're going to carry yourself
Yeah.
and what you're going to say, and the energy that you are using to fill up the space to a certain extent. It's like, once you've got that kind of practice,
Yeah.
to me, it gets easier and easier.
Yeah, and then you can really get up and actually play like you're improvising. And what you do, Sarah, is my stretch point.
Yeah.
And I'm really learning. And what I think that comes down for me is trust.
Yeah.
Really trusting it's all there. And when I have done that, I go, oh my gosh, wow, that was actually quite easy. I had no idea it could be that easy. It's all there. It's really about that trust.
Well, and I think too, when you allow yourself to practice and rehearse, you allow yourself the space to make mistakes, and the more comfortable you are that it might not be perfect or the same every time, the more when you get up, you're going to go with that flow instead of being disrupted by that, like I skip a section, now I'm disrupted and I stop in the middle of it.
Right.
It's like I had a lot of that in the beginning. Now, as soon as I mess it up, I just shift myself right over to the next place. And a lot of that was really just me doing it over and over and getting really comfortable, especially with laughing at myself sometimes. Sometimes I have to laugh at myself right on the stage in the moment because I've kind of gone in a different direction, but I want to rein myself back into my core message. And so having more fun with it rather than seeing it as, like I said, a mistake. I think improv really helped me realize, like, you're just a person. Like, you're just a person. So is everybody else looking at you right now. They're just a person. They didn't expect you to show up and be totally perfect. They did expect something of value. And they did expect to get a clear message. So as long as you're nailing those things, everything else you can kind of work with. I see Connie has a great question. And she was saying, it's great to see you, Barry. We've had lots of people, just so you know, in the chat saying how glad they are to see you today. But any tips on how to overcome using when they pause in a lecture or speech? It seems that once Connie realizes that she's saying it, she tries to get it out of her head, and then it actually just gets worse. And I think we've all had that happen.
Yes. This was a tip given to me, and I don't actually remember who shared this with me, but the tip that normally we get is, if you're umming a lot, pause. Well, pausing feels terrifying for many people, but there is power in that pause. I cannot tell you enough how space in between our words and silence is, it truly is, it is your power tool. But the tip pause sometimes doesn't translate in the brain. The tip is, if you notice yourself umming, begin to take just a breath. Learn to take just a breath rather than the So begin to coach yourself on stop here. In fact, I'm working with a client right now that gets so nervous. He's just terribly nervous. And so I said, okay, open with this short sentence. And then your next instructions is breathe. So he has an action to take rather than stopping something. So if you can take that kind of tip and go, okay, see if I can, for him, we're choreographing breathing into his speech. For others, it might just be in that inner authority coach that says, oh, I can take a breath here. And then you began to stop those ums. Tape record yourself, listen to yourself. That may also, you begin to go, oh my goodness gracious, I don't want this for my audience. And then you can begin to train that out of you or videotape yourself. I think actually voice recording is maybe better than a video of yourself because you're watching, and it's really important to really tune into the audio if you a lot.
Yeah, that's such a great point, because I think too, when you're looking at video of yourself, you're going to get caught up in all the other things that you think are weird. And it's like, if you want to get rid of the yeah, I really agree with that. Like, take some time to really listen. And also I would say, Connie, just don't expect yourself to get over it, like immediately. Like, I feel like it's taken me years to get to a point where much of what I do is very clean. And I still say at different times. So, it's just give yourself that goal of getting improvement is the goal, not necessarily perfection. The more you work on it, the better it gets.
Yeah.
So I know we've got just a few minutes. I want to make sure everybody who's got questions that you submit them if you have them. So make sure you take time to do that. I want to take 1 minute to ask you one final question, Barry, because I know our talk today was really about crafting a speech worth sharing. So can you just define for us when you think something is worth sharing? As a marketer, I know what I think that means, but I'm curious to know what that means to you. how do we make the speech, like if the speech is worth sharing, what does that really mean?
Yeah, so I really think speaking is an act of empathy. And part of being a performer, my attention is not only on my craft, on my art, on my speech, on my presentation, but I always, and I did this as a choreographer, and I did this as a teacher, and I do this as a trainer, I always take the seat in the audience. So I try to be in the mind of my listeners. I try to be in the mind of my observers and ask the question, is this of benefit to them? Is this of value to them? Have I really met my logical listeners? Have I met my creative listeners? Have I been clear? And that, I think, if you are a good steward of your audience, then I think that's a speech worth sharing. I think also in terms of the content of the speech, are you bringing something, and again, we have all kinds of different reasons that we're speaking, but if it's something that's going to move people, that it's going to encourage, motivate, inspire, then you've got that ticket right there of definitely saying you've got something to share, definitely worthwhile for your audience.
Yeah, thank you for that. Because I think, again, when I put my marketing hat on, and I'm using my speaking for these things, it's all sort of goes back to that core message, right? I really want to make sure that whatever happens, good or bad, when I'm up on that stage or I'm in Zoom or whatever it is, that truly, what came across to people is, that nugget of value, how they can take it and walk away and utilize it for something. That to me is really what creates that shareability or makes them want to talk about you with a friend later or a week later when they're still thinking about that talk that you gave.
Right.
Just a quick little example for me. Years ago, I heard my friend Jessica Thomason here in Asheville speak. And I remember one of the things she said, and she paused right after she said it, so it really sat in the room, was just because you're good at something doesn't mean you have to do it. And when she left that hanging in the air, I told her later, I was like, you just rocked my world. And that was like years ago. And I still hear her saying that from that one talk she gave. So, it's like when you have that really clear, I just think it makes people really feel the message, which is so powerful. Yeah. So I am so glad you have spent this hour with me today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. We do have one more question, if you don't mind spending just an extra minute or two at the end, but I want to give you a chance to share with everybody who might have to head out. You have an upcoming class. I want you to tell everybody about it and how they can get involved, because I know that anybody who'd like to expand this part of what they're doing would just be really blessed to work with you and have you there.
Yeah, the class is called Craft a Speech Worth Sharing. It is content-based. It is not delivery-based at all. So we really do, you have an opportunity in actually a 7-week time. It's 6 sessions. We take a break in the middle to give you time to craft that speech. But in that time period, you actually can build a speech. And I had a number of folks in my last one in May build a speech and then deliver the speech. So that's what can happen. And I walk you through the clear steps, the questions, the techniques to generate the content. And what you're left with is kind of what Sarah was saying. Oh my gosh, I do these things, but now I know I do these things. And I can then now create my own system for future speeches. I think many people are given an opportunity to speak, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? How do I start? And all of those fears come up. This will really give you a clear step-by-step guideline, guidance, shape of a speech that you can just repeat over and over and over. So I think, yes, there's the link to it. And I am actually going to offer, I haven't added it to the link yet on SimpleTix, but I'm offering to JB Media, my audience today, $75 off of that course. I'll add that code in. So the code will be JB Media. So give me about 10 minutes after we get off this line if anyone is interested in signing up. It's $325. So that will be, help me out, Sarah, with the math.
250?
Thank you. Okay.
75 off. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So yes, my brain isn't working super well on the money part, on the number part. So yes. So if you're interested, love to have you join. Give me an email if you have questions, want to talk it over as well.
Great. Well, thank you for all that information. Like she said, I put the link into the chat, but also when I send out the recording in a couple of days, I'll make sure I send you all the link to Barry's class, and I will send you that code. And I really appreciate that so much, Barry, for our crew, our JB Media family here. And I know some of you have to go, so thank you for joining us. We do have a couple more questions. If you're okay, Barry, to take just a couple more questions.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Nowhere to go.
The first one comes from Jeanette, and it is, if you are visibly shaking, should you acknowledge it and be human, or just assume nobody's really noticing? My body sometimes has its own ideas.
I think the first question I would ask you is, who is your audience? There's some audiences that probably might not be a good idea to mention it. And the truth is that the likelihood is that nobody is noticing it. To me, I think really my advice to you would be pause, take a breath, ground your feet, relax. If you can, again, create those inner coaching messages to yourself, and then just go on, just ride along with that. And again, who's your audience? If it's an informal group and it's a kind of a group of friends, sort of colleagues, my gosh, certainly mention that. It can really lighten up the room. They may be picking up on it, and it can lighten it up, the energy in the room. For more formal, self-care, take care of yourself. See if you can create your own inner coach and keep on rolling through that speech. This is the thing, is that sometimes there isn't a one answer. It very much depends on where you are, who you're with, and what your purpose is.
Yeah, and I really agree with that, because again, it also, what you're expressing, I was thinking about how like the different sizes of rooms, even sometimes I think everybody's noticing something, but the truth is nobody's noticing it, but sometimes I'm in a smaller, more intimate room, and that might be the perfect time for me to say, I need to ground for a minute, and then keep going. And a lot of times that's not disruptive to the situation. Yeah. So the last question we had, and I'm glad that Samantha asked this, because you and I may need to do another digital drop-in about this topic, which is, how are you getting your speaking engagements? I know for a lot of people that would like to go in that direction, one of the things that kind of feels like a struggle is, how do I pitch myself, or how am I going to find these events? And there's a lot of stress involved in that. How have you seen over the years that you've gotten the invites to the different things, especially when you started out?
So those came from actually offering free trainings, those kinds of, let me come into your organization and offer you a free facilitation. And then sometimes I got invited for more formal speaking engagements. This is actually an area that this is probably my weak link in my own business, is how to make those connections for greater opportunities. But that, associations, like I spoke down in Marion at the chamber there, Waynesville Chamber of Commerce, the Asheville Chamber of Commerce, and then people are there that then invite you to come to their event. So that's offering a service first. Show up, show yourself is really that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that, because I will say, when I started out, I gave a lot of I would say the majority of my speaking and talking engagements were totally free the first 2 years, because I was getting my feet wet. I was proving myself. I was proving the value of what I could do. And at the time, like I said, I wasn't 100% sure that's even the direction I wanted to go. So I strategically chose like organizations and partners where I knew their audience was a really good fit for me. And then I offered that stuff at no cost. I also think, and like I said, maybe we'll do a digital drop-in on this piece in particular with some more speaker people to share these ideas. I also think now, if I'm honest, the biggest part of what brings me work after all these years is the amount of time that both myself and my business partner have spent on partnership marketing, which is literally really understanding the value of having like a relationship that you're building upon with people that are already getting in front of the audiences that you care about. And so, you know, I have a very strong niche in tourism marketing. I've spoken all around the country about it. I especially get invited to more rural areas that see Asheville as a place that was rural America and then blew up to be one of the trendiest cities in the country. And so, you know, I've grown with Asheville, with that sort of image and reputation. And so, you know, I suddenly found that, you know what, I don't always want to go talk in Atlanta or New York City. Do you know where I'm a big rock star though? Eastern Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Mississippi, right? Because I live in a rural area and those people really want to hear somebody who understands what it's like to live in a rural area. So as you start to really define like which audiences really gel with you, you know, a good example too would be I spoke across the country all of 2018 at events related to independent bookstores. And independent bookstores were a place that I spent a lot of my youth. I'm a big reader. I was a writer. It's, you know, they're very community oriented. And the first conference I got into, I made a lot of friends. And then all of a sudden I got invites through that network to all of their other conferences. And so, you know, that sort of relationship partnership marketing, I think for me has been actually the biggest like door opener, more than social media advertising, more than these other things that I still do to promote myself. That stuff is where I've gotten the real potency. Is from people really trusting me, knowing that I'm going to be able to make a room, have fun, that the information I'm going to share is going to be valuable, that people are going to feel really connected. As soon as they sort of see me do that once, it's like, I want you to tell me, you know, yes, you enjoyed having me at your conference. Great. Who else can use me?
Right.
Let's talk about it. Let's have a meeting. Let's grab a coffee. Give me some introductions to some people. You don't have to sell it. I'll sell it. But at least I need, you know, that introduction to folks.
Right. Yeah. Well,
So I
actually,
think-
my favorite audience actually in teaching are architects and engineers. And sometimes I it's like I think to myself, oh my God, who would have told me, you know, 10 years ago, I would be able to actually support, teach, and uplift an engineer, you know, so, but they're terrific. They're brilliant. They just need to come out of themselves and learn how to simplify their language and communicate to an audience. So it is a blast.
Well, like I said, Barry, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really
Yeah.
delightful. Like I said, we've gotten lots of comments in the chat about how much everybody appreciates this information. And again, everyone, you will get an email from me with the recording, with the link to Barry's workshop, as well as her code that she gave us today so graciously. And I also want to invite everyone, put the first Wednesday of October on your calendar. We will have our next digital drop-in as usual from 12:10 to 1 p.m. And in October, I am kicking off an Ask the Expert series. And so I will be there on my own next month, and you will be able to submit questions in advance and get me to talk about any marketing topics that you want. And then going forward, we're hopefully going to have a number of other experts that can join us for that periodically throughout the year. So please join us for the next digital drop-in. And thank you all so much for being here. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care, everyone. It's great to be with you.